Hello, my relatives. Leech Lake Tribal College. Elaine Fleming, Indigenous cause. And welcome in the Magani Duk.
Buju Jackie, Indigenous cause. My name is Jackie Blue. I'm a first-year student here in the first generation as well. This is Anton Treuer.
Miigwech. Oh.
Then just look at the camera.
Uh-huh. Miigwech kakana ginawa gipe jaigo ma ewenisa inendagusian de bagagi duan ewenisa we ma duan bangigo yo nendaman dwaj gesh jigeng ewenisa de kendemeg Gego ga pishiwe bak mewenja minawago gesh chigeng we wenisa nawaj de weni panak yo osa ish chigeng e wenisa de gikinu muindwango gidabinuji minanik ninda shwin wago shindigo migizi ndode minawa hoetiga zaga squaji mekag indonjiba namanji dogish binisido taguan Ojibwe dajagana shimigaye bangi. So I want to thank everybody for coming out today. It's really my pleasure to be here. I'm really pleased to see you all here, whether you're from the high school or the college or in the community. And I've been asked, I've been doing a couple of talks today, so I've been asked this time around to share a little bit about education, what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, and some perspective on education. So I think what I'll do is talk a little bit about history of education. Some of this you know, a little bit about the history of residential boarding schools and so forth, some of which you might not know about how that impacted communities, and also some perspective that's really good, and it's good to be challenged about what we're doing now and how we can do it better yet. Obviously, we have a lot of good stuff going on in Indian country. We have our share of problems too. And everybody, whether they're native or not, are kind of scratching their heads trying to find answers to how we can be the most effective that we can be in teaching Native youth and also teaching others about Native people. So in the 1880s, there was a big shift in United States government policy. Prior to that point in time, the government had focused on getting land from Indians. There were periods of war, conflict, relocation. I'm not really going to focus on that stuff today. But once there was kind of a concentration of Native people on portions of their original land, reservations, then there were a number of other things going on. The government sought to break up even the land within reservation borders. As a result, today, Native people own around 4% of their own reservation at Leech Lake. Sometimes that surprises people. And especially if you're not from this area, people think a lot of weird things, right? And the things they think are sometimes really contradictory. Indians are all rich from casinos, or Indians are all living in squalor on a reservation somewhere, or that they're, barbed wire fences keeping people from getting off the reservation, that there wouldn't be Native people on the reservation or wouldn't be welcomed. And of course, since you're from this area, you know it's a lot more complicated than that. And there are lots of silly thoughts out there. But it's important to create opportunities for people to learn more. And we can't afford to be so paralyzed by feelings of anger or guilt or shame, whether we're Native or not, to the point where it paralyzes our ability to do more. And all of those feelings are important because sometimes Native people feel so guilty and feel so worried about offending somebody that it's safer not to say anything about Indians. And that's not helping things either. So we need to create a good space where it's okay to ask questions and we can advance that understanding. Today we know that education is about opening doors and providing opportunities for our students. At that point in time, education was more designed to take away culture, language, disconnect people from their communities, and was less about the opportunity part. Not that those who advocated it would say that, or even felt that. A lot of them really did believe that they were helping Native people by engineering this sort of policy. These schools were industrial at first too, and the schools changed a bit over time. I know when my grandmother went to residential boarding school, it was a little bit different. They didn't do as much ditch digging and that kind of stuff. But in the 1800s when it started, they were very much about work. And kids actually spent half the day doing work and half the day receiving an education. Many kids had been gone from age 6 to age 18, couldn't even recognize their parents, and vice versa. Could not speak the same language as their parents, and vice versa. So those connections or disconnections remained very strong, powerful. Kids were assimilated, they knew their English, but the price was really, really heavy. In fact, if you want to understand some of the problems in Indian country, it starts here. Like, how does somebody learn how to parent? From how they're parented. Doesn't mean you're exactly the same kind of parent that your parents were, but you learn your skills and tools. And what happens when you have not just one, but sometimes 2, 3, 4 generations in a family going through residential boarding schools? Kids that are raised with lots of discipline, but very little nurture. Well, what happens is it puts a great big tear in the social fabric. It is not fair to say, hey, it's all in the past, why don't you just forget about it now? Right? That'd be like beating somebody in the head with a hammer, stopping and saying, look, nobody's beating you in the head with a hammer anymore. Why don't you quit being so mad about it? It happened in the past. But a lot of times, outside of Native communities, there is that perspective that Native people should just get over it and pick up the trash in their yard. I'm not a racist, but why don't they just get over it? Why do they need this? Why do they need that? But that's without a deeper understanding of the historical process that has created things like historical trauma. And probably don't have time to get into a major workshop on that, but the effects are still very much felt and passed on through generations. Kids had to go to school. It didn't have to be a Bureau of Indian Affairs run boarding school. They could also go to mission schools. But for the most part, the policies were very similar in the sense that there were still English-only instruction, still harsh punishments for the speaking of tribal languages, and a pretty widely reported issues with sexual abuse in some of the mission schools. Some of the parents preferred those options, even if they were not themselves Christian, because the kids were sometimes not brought as far away from home, and it was a little easier for them to connect. Eventually, it took a while from, the late 1800s, 1870s until the 19-teens for the schools to start getting a little bit of criticism, but eventually they did. There's a big report, they've got a copy of it at the BSU library, called the Merriam Report, issued in 1928, and it went through all issues in Indian policy, and it blasted the schools for all of these things we just talked about, for poor nutrition, poor health care, insufficient clothing, exceedingly harsh physical punishment, and the disempowerment of parents in the raising of their own children. So that was a big step for the government to say, some of these things are negatives. We should do something about it. There were some unintended consequences. Among them, when you put a bunch of people together and you make them suffer, they form pretty strong friendships. And the founders of the National Congress of American Indians and the founders of the American Indian Movement and a number of other organizations were people from different tribes who suffered together next to one another in residential boarding schools. Government wasn't planning that. A lot of Native attitudes about education are formed as in direct response to this historical development. There's still a widely held belief that getting an education means getting quote-unquote whitewashed. I know when I went to college, I got that a lot just from my peers. oh yeah, college boy. He's not going to know anything about us. Or if I'm dressed like this, someone will just assume that there's no knowledge of language, culture, anything like that. Very common. There's also a widely held belief that, getting educated means getting assimilated. That you're giving up something to get whatever it is you get when you get an education. There's still a very widely held distrust of people in governmental positions of authority and educational positions of authority. A lot of times teachers are wondering, we got truancy issues and the parents aren't at parent-teacher conferences, don't they care? Well, it's not that they don't care. There are a variety of things that impact that. One of the things is some people have a chip on their shoulder about education, and it's voiced. Some people I know are actively encouraged not to pursue higher education, not even to finish high school. There's pressure. You don't really have that in other racial groups in the United States. Even although you have an achievement gap for blacks in the United States, the historical experience with education is different. For them, education was an opportunity for a long time unfairly denied. For Native people, it was part of a planned assimilation. By the way, when I went to school, I got the same education most people did. I learned a sugar-coated version of Columbus and Thanksgiving. Heck, I wanted the pilgrim hat rather than the feather thing because I thought it was cool. Some schools are doing a great job. I know Schoolcraft Learning Community, they have their high schoolers put Columbus on trial. Someone's there saying, here's what he did, here's what's wrong with what he did, and someone else will argue the other side and say, look, it's bad, but lots of people did slavery. The Romans did slavery. He was a man of his times, and you have to understand him as such. And so they kind of argue it back and forth, but everybody arrives at a deeper understanding. There's ways to deal with 5-year-olds too without having to put up the lithograph and saying, okay, color in the blood. There's the issue of who's heroes. If you look at all the various denominations of U.S. currency, with the exception of Benjamin Franklin and Hamilton, they've all personally killed Indians and engineered policies that were detrimental to Native people. As an individual, who wants to look at your ugly chapters? As a nation, who wants to look at your ugly chapters? What we teach in school and how we teach it matters a lot. And if we don't change what we're doing, it is still assimilation. But to me, I think this is critically important for people to know and have opportunities to learn about themselves. So it's time to do away with the lies our teachers told us and open up the doors to thinking differently about education, the way we do it, and developing a perspective about Indian education that'll help us understand one another and make things different going forward. I know some of you might have to take a bus and get rolling, so I really thank you very much for your time and attention and hope it was of assistance. I've got flyers for the Ojibwe language program at Bemidji State University, cards if you want to keep in touch, and books and things like that. So, miigwech.
Leech Lake Tribal College provides quality higher education grounded in Anishinaabe values. Miigwech.